The scorching Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Cedar Creek, population 3,847, where dreams seemed as scarce as rain in August. Jake Matthews wiped the sweat from his forehead with a grease-stained rag, leaving a dark smudge across his sun-weathered skin. At 19, his hands already bore the calluses of hard work, but his heart still harbored the tender hopes of youth. "Jake, that transmission ain't gonna fix itself," hollered his father, Bill Matthews, from beneath the hood of a battered Ford pickup. Bill was a man carved from the same tough Texas clay as the land around them, weathered, practical, and skeptical of anything that didn't involve an honest day's work with his hands. Matthews Auto Repair had been the family business for 3 generations, situated on the edge of town, where the pavement gave way to cattle ranches and endless fields of mesquite. The shop smelled of motor oil, old leather, and the dreams that seemed to evaporate in the relentless heat. Jake loved his father and respected the legacy, but every fiber of his being yearned for something more. "Yes, sir," Jake replied, though his mind was elsewhere, drifting to the melody that had been haunting him all morning. It was one of those George Strait classics that seemed to capture everything beautiful and heartbreaking about life in small-town Texas. His fingers unconsciously tapped the rhythm against his thigh as he worked. The bell above the shop door chimed, and in walked Emma Rodriguez, Jake's best friend since childhood. At 18, she possessed the kind of natural beauty that belonged on magazine covers, but her fierce loyalty and sharp wit made her even more remarkable. Emma had been Jake's biggest supporter since they were kids, always believing in his musical dreams, even when he struggled to believe in them himself. "Afternoon, Mr. Matthews," Emma called out cheerfully. Bill grunted a response from beneath the hood, and Emma made her way to Jake's workstation. She carried 2 sweet teas from Murphy's General Store, condensation dripping down the glass bottles in the oppressive heat. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing him a bottle. Their fingers touched briefly, and Jake felt that familiar flutter in his chest that he'd been trying to ignore for months. Emma was his best friend, but lately she'd become something more complicated, something he wasn't sure he was ready to examine. "Thanks, Em. You're a lifesaver." Jake took a long drink, the cold liquid providing momentary relief from the heat that seemed to radiate from every surface. Emma perched on a nearby stool, her sundress a splash of yellow against the muted browns and grays of the garage. "So I heard something interesting at Murphy's this morning," she said, her dark eyes sparkling with barely contained excitement. "Oh yeah, Mrs. Henderson's cat have more kittens," Jake teased, though he could tell from Emma's expression that whatever she'd heard was significant. "Very funny. No, I heard that Charlie Morrison is putting together a showcase for the Lone Star Music Festival in Austin next month. He's looking for local talent, and Jake..." She paused dramatically. "I think you should audition." Jake nearly choked on his sweet tea. The Lone Star Music Festival was legendary in Texas country music circles, a 3-day celebration that attracted thousands of fans and industry professionals from across the state. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything for a small-town dreamer. "Emma, I appreciate the thought, but nothing." She stood up, pacing the small space between workbenches. "Jake, you're the most talented singer I've ever heard. You've got something special, something real. These modern country singers with their auto-tuned voices and manufactured personas, they don't have what you have." From across the garage, Jake heard his father's wrench clatter to the floor. Bill's weathered face appeared above the truck's hood, his expression skeptical. "Now hold on there, Emma. I appreciate you looking out for Jake, but we've got a business to run here. Jake's got responsibilities." Emma's cheeks flushed, but she held her ground. "Mr. Matthews, with all due respect, Jake has a gift, a real gift. And gifts like that don't come along every day." Bill wiped his hands on his coveralls, his jaw set in that stubborn way Jake knew all too well. Emma, I've seen plenty of kids with gifts over the years. You know what most of them have to show for it? Broken dreams and empty pockets. Jake's got a steady future right here. The tension in the garage grew thick as the humid air outside. Jake felt caught between two worlds, the security of the known and the terrifying possibility of the unknown. His father's words carried the weight of experience and genuine concern, but Emma's belief in him stirred something deep in his soul. Dad, what if I could do both? What if I auditioned for the festival but still kept up with my work here? Jake's voice was quiet but determined. Bill's expression softened slightly. He'd raised Jake to be respectful and hard-working, but he'd also raised him to be his own man. Son, I won't stop you from chasing your dreams, but I want you to understand what you're getting into. The music business is brutal, and it chews up small-town kids like you for breakfast. Emma stepped closer to Jake, her voice gentle but insistent. Maybe so, Mr. Matthews. But what if Jake is different? What if he's got what it takes to make it? Jake felt the weight of both their expectations, the crushing responsibility of choosing between security and possibility. But as he looked into Emma's eyes, he saw something that made his decision easier. She believed in him completely and unconditionally. I want to try, Jake said finally. I need to try. Bill studied his son's face for a long moment, seeing something there that reminded him of his own youth, his own abandoned dreams. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right, son, but you keep up with your work here, and if this music thing doesn't pan out, you come back with no complaints. Deal. Deal, Jake said, extending his hand to shake his father's calloused palm. Emma let out a whoop of excitement that echoed through the garage. This is going to be amazing. We need to start preparing right away. What songs are you going to perform? Jake's face grew serious. This was the part that might complicate everything. I want to do George Strait songs, classic country, the real stuff. Emma's smile faltered slightly. Jake, honey, I love George Strait as much as you do, but, well, that's pretty traditional for today's audiences. Maybe you should consider some more contemporary material. No. Jake's voice was firm, surprising even himself with its certainty. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it my way. George Strait's music means something. It tells real stories about real people. It's not about flash or gimmicks. It's about heart and authenticity. Emma nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. You're right. You're absolutely right. If you're going to make it in this business, you need to be yourself, not some manufactured version of what you think people want. As the afternoon wore on, Jake threw himself into his work with renewed energy. Every bolt he turned, every engine he diagnosed seemed to bring him closer to his audition, but beneath his excitement lay a gnawing anxiety. What if Emma was wrong? What if his father was right, and he was just another small-town dreamer destined for disappointment? That evening, after the shop closed, Jake sat on the front porch of the family's modest ranch house, his guitar across his lap. The sun was setting behind the mesquite trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed to stretch on forever. This was his favorite time of day, when the oppressive heat finally began to ease and the world grew quiet enough to hear his own thoughts. He strummed a few chords, his fingers finding the familiar patterns of Amarillo Morning, one of his favorite George Strait songs. The melody seemed to capture everything he loved about Texas. The vastness, the beauty, the sense of infinite possibility that lived just beyond the horizon. His mother, Sarah Matthews, stepped onto the porch carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. At 45, she retained the gentle beauty that had caught his father's eye all those years ago, though her hands showed the wear of raising a family and helping run the business. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, settling into the rocking chair beside him without waiting for an answer. "Course not, Mama." Jake accepted the lemonade gratefully, the tart sweetness cutting through the dusty residue in his throat. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of Cedar Creek, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the mesquite, the far-off hum of traffic on the interstate. "Your father's worried about you," Sarah said finally. "I know, Mama. But I have to try. I can't spend the rest of my life wondering, what if?" Sarah reached over and squeezed his free hand. "Honey, I want you to know that I'm proud of you, no matter what happens. It takes courage to chase your dreams, and not everyone has that kind of courage. You think I'm doing the right thing?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky. "When I was your age, I wanted to be a teacher. I had scholarships, acceptance letters, the whole thing. But I met your father, and, well, life had different plans for me." Jake had never heard this story before. His mother had always seemed perfectly content with her life in Cedar Creek. "Do you ever regret it? Not becoming a teacher?" "Oh, honey, I've had a wonderful life. Your father and I built something good together, and I got the greatest gift of all, you. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder what might have been. I don't want you to have those same regrets." The weight of her words settled over Jake like a warm blanket. Here was permission he hadn't even realized he needed. Permission to dream, to risk, to possibly fail. "Will you come to the audition?" he asked. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Sarah said. And Jake could hear the smile in her voice even in the growing darkness. As the stars began to appear in the vast Texas sky, Jake continued to play, his voice carrying across the prairie night. He sang of highways and heartbreaks, of small towns and big dreams, of the eternal hope that tomorrow might be the day everything changes. He didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would indeed bring changes. The first steps on a journey that would test everything he believed about himself and his music. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with moments of triumph and crushing disappointment, but it would also lead to an encounter that would change his life forever. For now, though, he was just a young man with a guitar and a dream, singing to the stars and hoping they were listening. 3 weeks had passed since Jake made his decision to audition, and the reality of what lay ahead was beginning to settle in like morning frost on a windshield. The small practice room behind Murphy's General Store had become his second home, filled with the sound of repeated scales and the same George Strait songs played over and over until every note was perfect. Emma had become his unofficial manager, coach, and biggest cheerleader all rolled into one. She'd borrowed her older brother's truck so they could make the drive to Austin for the audition, which was scheduled for the following Saturday. The Lone Star Music Festival auditions were notoriously competitive, with hundreds of hopefuls vying for just 12 spots in the showcase. "You're overthinking it," Emma said from her perch on an overturned milk crate. Jake had just finished his third run-through of All My Exes Live in Texas, and his frustration was showing. "I can't get the bridge right. It sounds forced, like I'm trying too hard." Jake set his guitar down and ran his hands through his dark hair, leaving it disheveled and sticking up at odd angles. "That's because you are trying too hard. Jake, when you sing these songs at home, or here when it's just us, they sound perfect, natural, like they were written for your voice." Emma stood and walked over to him, placing her hands on his shoulders. "You need to remember why you love these songs in the first place." Jake looked into her eyes and felt some of the tension leave his body. Emma had always been able to calm him down, even when they were kids, and he'd get worked up about some perceived injustice on the playground. "Tell me about the first time you heard George Strait," she said softly. A smile tugged at the corners of Jake's mouth. "I was 7. Dad had the radio on in the shop while we were working on old Mrs. Patterson's Buick. Amarillo Morning came on, and something about it just stopped me in my tracks. The way he could paint a picture with just his voice, make you see those Texas plains and feel that longing for home." "And how did it make you feel?" "Like I understood something important about myself, like I belonged to something bigger than just Cedar Creek." Jake's voice grew softer, more reflective. I remember thinking that if I could make just one person feel the way that song made me feel, it would be worth everything." Emma smiled. "There he is. That's the Jake Matthews who needs to show up on Saturday." Before Jake could respond, the door to the practice room burst open. In walked Tyler Brennan, flanked by his usual crew of hangers-on. Tyler was 22, drove a brand new pickup truck with flames painted on the sides, and fancied himself Cedar Creek's answer to modern country music. His father owned the largest ranch in the county, which meant Tyler had never wanted for anything, except maybe talent and humility. Well, if it isn't our resident fossil," Tyler drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Still practicing those dinosaur songs, Jake?" Jake felt his jaw tighten, but Emma's hand on his arm kept him seated. "Hello, Tyler. Shouldn't you be somewhere practicing your lip-syncing?" Tyler's entourage snickered, but Tyler himself wasn't amused. "That's rich, coming from someone who's about to embarrass himself and this whole town at the Lone Star Festival. What's that supposed to mean?" Emma stood up, her petite frame somehow managing to radiate fierce protectiveness. "Oh, didn't you hear? Word is that Jake here is planning to audition with George Strait covers." Tyler shook his head in exaggerated disappointment. "Jake, buddy, this isn't 1985. Nobody wants to hear that old-fashioned garbage anymore. Country music has evolved." "Into what?" "Auto-tuned pop songs with a fiddle thrown in to make them sound country?" Jake's temper was starting to flare, despite Emma's calming presence. "Into music that actually sells records and fills stadiums," Tyler shot back. "Face it, Jake, you're living in the past, and the past doesn't pay the bills." One of Tyler's friends, Danny Hawkins, chimed in. "My cousin works in Nashville, and he says they're looking for the next big thing. Fresh faces, contemporary sound, not some small-town mechanic playing dress-up." Jake stood up slowly, his fists clenched at his sides. Emma quickly positioned herself between the two groups, her dark eyes flashing with anger. "You know what, Tyler? Jake has more talent in his little finger than you have in your entire body," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor of rage beneath it. "And when he makes it, not if, when, you'll still be here in Cedar Creek, playing the same 3 chords at the Roadhouse on Friday nights for drunk cowboys." Tyler's face reddened. "Is that right? Well, Emma, when your boyfriend crashes and burns in Austin, don't come crying to me. Some of us live in reality." "Jake's not my—" Emma started, then stopped herself, realizing that particular clarification wasn't worth the breath. "You know what, Tyler?" Jake's voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute conviction. "You're right about one thing. Some music is about what sells, and some music is about what matters. I know which side I'm on." Tyler laughed, but there was an edge to it. "We'll see about that on Saturday. Matter of fact, I'll be there too. Got my own audition slot." He paused for dramatic effect. "May the best man win." As Tyler and his crew filed out, their laughter echoing down the hallway, Jake slumped back onto his chair. The confidence Emma had helped him build over the past hour had evaporated like morning dew. "Don't listen to him," Emma said immediately. "Tyler Brennan wouldn't know real music if it bit him on his designer jeans." "What if he's right, though? What if I'm just some small-town dreamer playing music that nobody wants to hear anymore?" Emma knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers. "Jake Matthews, look at me." When he met her eyes, she continued, "Music isn't about what's trendy or what sells the most records. It's about truth. It's about connecting with people on a level that matters. George Strait's music has been doing that for decades, and it's still doing it today through artists like you. But what if the judges don't see it that way? Then they're not the right people to judge your music," Emma said firmly. "But I don't think that's going to happen. I think when you get up on that stage and sing with your whole heart, people are going to remember why they fell in love with country music in the first place." Jake squeezed her hands gratefully. "What would I do without you, Em?" Something flickered across Emma's face, an emotion Jake couldn't quite identify. "You'll never have to find out," she said softly. The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparation and nervous energy. Jake continued working at the garage during the day, but his evenings were spent practicing, fine-tuning every aspect of his performance. His mother had altered one of his father's old Western shirts to fit him perfectly, and Emma had convinced him to invest in a new pair of boots for the occasion. The night before the audition, the Matthews family gathered around the dinner table for what Sarah had declared a celebration feast, complete with Jake's favorite chicken fried steak and all the fixings. The conversation was light, carefully avoiding the elephant in the room, but Jake could feel the weight of expectation settling over the meal like humidity before a storm. "Son," Bill said as Sarah was clearing the dishes, "I want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, your mother and I are proud of you. It takes guts to put yourself out there like this." "Thanks, Dad. That means everything to me." Bill reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather pick case. "This was my grandfather's. He played guitar too back in the day. Never made anything of it, but he loved it all the same. I want you to have it." Jake took the case with trembling hands. Inside was a single tortoiseshell pick, worn smooth by decades of use. "Dad, I can't take this. It's a family heirloom." "Exactly, and your family. Besides," Bill's weathered face cracked into a rare smile, "maybe it's time it got back to making music again." Later that evening, Jake sat on his porch once more, the weight of his grandfather's pick between his fingers. Emma had gone home to pack for the early morning drive to Austin, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the vast Texas sky. He strummed a few chords, the familiar patterns bringing him comfort. Tomorrow would be the biggest day of his life so far, the first real test of whether his dreams had any foundation in reality. The songs he'd chosen, "All My Exes Live in Texas," "Amarillo Morning," and "Check Yes or No," represented everything he loved about George Strait's music. Storytelling, authenticity, and that indefinable quality that made you believe every word. As midnight approached, Jake finally headed inside, knowing he needed rest for tomorrow's journey. But sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of bright stage lights and the sound of applause, or was it mockery? In his dreams, he couldn't tell the difference. The alarm clock's shrill cry at 5 a.m. felt like a gunshot in the pre-dawn silence. Today was the day. Austin awaited, and with it, the chance to prove that traditional country music still had a place in the modern world. Jake showered, dressed carefully in his altered Western shirt and new boots, and grabbed his guitar case. In the kitchen, his mother had already prepared coffee and toast, though his nervous stomach rebelled at the thought of food. "Eat something," Sarah insisted. "You'll need your strength today." As Jake forced down a few bites of toast, Emma's truck pulled into the driveway, its headlights cutting through the morning darkness. It was time. The goodbye with his parents was brief but emotional. Sarah hugged him tightly, whispering prayers and encouragement in his ear. Bill shook his hand solemnly, the gesture carrying more weight than 1,000 words. "Bring home something to be proud of," Bill said simply, as the truck pulled away from the only home Jake had ever known, carrying him toward an uncertain future in Austin. He clutched his grandfather's pick and tried to quiet the chaos in his mind. Somewhere ahead lay the Lone Star Music Festival auditions, Tyler Brennan's smirking face, and the judges who would determine whether his dreams had any substance. But also, somewhere ahead, though he couldn't know it yet, was an encounter that would change everything he thought he knew about music, success, and the power of staying true to yourself. The Texas highway stretched out before them like a ribbon of possibility, and Jake Matthews was ready to find out what lay at the end of it. The Austin Music Center buzzed with nervous energy as hundreds of aspiring country artists prepared for their moment of truth. Jake and Emma had arrived at dawn, securing a spot in the long line that snaked around the building and down the block. The morning air was crisp for Texas, but Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead as the reality of what he was about to attempt settled in. "Look at all these people," Emma whispered, her eyes wide as she surveyed the crowd. Every type of musician seemed represented, from polished Nashville hopefuls with expensive guitars to rough-around-the-edges performers who looked like they'd driven straight from honky-tonk stages across the state. Jake clutched his guitar case tighter, suddenly feeling underdressed and overwhelmed. Near the front of the line, he could see Tyler Brennan holding court with a group of other young performers, his laugh carrying across the crowd like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Second thoughts?" Emma asked quietly, reading the uncertainty in Jake's face. "No, maybe. I don't know." Jake ran his free hand through his hair. What if Tyler's right? What if I'm just some small-town kid with outdated ideas about music?" Before Emma could answer, a voice behind them cut through their conversation. "Excuse me, are you Jake Matthews?" They turned to see a young woman about Emma's age with short blonde hair and kind eyes. She carried a well-worn guitar case covered in stickers from various music venues across Texas. "Yes, I'm Jake. This is Emma Rodriguez. I'm Melissa Carter. I drove up from Lubbock." She extended a calloused hand that spoke of countless hours spent practicing. "I heard about your audition through the grapevine. Word is you're doing George Strait songs?" Jake nodded warily, unsure if this was going to be another mockery session. "That's amazing," Melissa said, her face lighting up. "I mean, truly amazing. Do you know how rare it is to find someone our age who appreciates traditional country music? Most of these guys," she gestured toward the crowd, "they're all trying to sound like pop stars with cowboy hats." Emma grinned, immediately warming to Melissa. "Finally, someone with taste. Jake's been getting grief about his song choices, but I keep telling him that authenticity never goes out of style." "Authenticity is exactly the right word," Melissa agreed. "My grandfather raised me on George Strait, Conway Twitty, Patsy Cline, the real deal. That music tells stories, it makes you feel something deep in your chest." As the morning progressed, the three of them found themselves forming an unlikely alliance against the anxiety that seemed to permeate the waiting area. Melissa shared horror stories from previous auditions, while Emma provided a steady stream of encouragement and snacks she'd packed for the long day ahead. Around mid-morning, Jake noticed a commotion near the entrance to the building. A small entourage had arrived, several men in expensive suits surrounding a figure Jake couldn't quite make out. Other musicians were straining their necks to get a better look, and the whispered speculation was spreading through the crowd like wildfire. "Who do you think that is?" Emma asked, standing on her tiptoes to see over the heads in front of them. "Probably some music executive," Melissa said. "They sometimes show up to these things to scout talent, though usually they stay behind the scenes." Tyler Brennan had apparently noticed the arrival as well, and Jake watched with disgust as he immediately began making his way toward the mysterious entourage, presumably to introduce himself and his fresh contemporary sound. "Attention auditioners!" A voice boomed over a portable PA system. A harried-looking woman in her 50s stood on the steps of the building, clipboard in hand. "We're about to begin the process. You'll be called in groups of 10. Each performer gets exactly 3 minutes. That's one song, people. Make it count." The crowd stirred with renewed nervous energy. Jake felt his mouth go dry as the reality hit him. 3 minutes to prove that years of dreaming weren't just small-town delusion. "You're going to be great," Emma said, squeezing his arm. "I can feel it." The first group was called, and Jake watched as 10 nervous performers filed into the building. Some looked confident, others appeared ready to bolt back to their cars. The waiting continued, punctuated by occasional cheers or groans from inside the building as auditions concluded. "Group 7, you're up," the woman called. Jake's heart nearly stopped. That was his group. Emma hugged him quickly. "Remember what we talked about. Don't think about Tyler or anyone else. Just sing from your heart." Melissa clasped his hand. Break a leg, Jake. Show them what real country music sounds like. The interior of the Austin Music Center had been transformed into an impromptu audition space. A small stage dominated one end of the room, with a table of judges positioned about 20 feet away. Jake recognized a few faces, local radio personalities and music venue owners, but most were strangers who held his immediate future in their hands. The first few auditions blurred together in Jake's mind. A pop country number with choreographed moves that belonged more on a television talent show than a Texas stage. A rock-influenced song that seemed designed more to showcase vocal gymnastics than tell a story. Each performance was technically proficient, but Jake found himself wondering where the heart was, where the connection to the music lived. Then Tyler Brennan took the stage. Jake had to admit that Tyler looked the part. Designer jeans, perfectly styled hair, and a guitar that probably cost more than Jake made in 3 months at the repair shop. His song was a slick, contemporary number about small-town girls and big-city dreams, performed with the kind of polish that spoke of professional coaching and studio time. The judges seemed impressed, nodding along with the catchy chorus and taking notes throughout the performance. When Tyler finished, he flashed his trademark confident smile and gave a small bow that somehow managed to seem both humble and arrogant at the same time. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan," one of the judges said. "Very contemporary sound, very marketable. We'll be in touch." As Tyler exited the stage, he caught Jake's eye and winked, the gesture clearly saying, "Beat that, small town." 3 more performers took their turns, each delivering competent but forgettable renditions of modern country radio fare. Then Jake heard his name called, Jake Matthews, from Cedar Creek, Texas. The walk to the stage felt like it took hours, though it was probably only seconds. Jake could feel the weight of the judge's eyes on him as he adjusted the microphone stand and settled his guitar strap across his shoulder. In the back of the room, he could see Emma giving him an encouraging thumbs up. "What will you be performing today, Mr. Matthews?" asked the head judge, a man in his 60s with the kind of weathered face that suggested decades in the music business. "I'll be singing All My Exes Live in Texas by George Strait," Jake replied, his voice steadier than he felt. A murmur rippled through the room. Jake couldn't tell if it was appreciation or amusement, but he forced himself not to care. This was his moment, his chance to prove that traditional country music still had power and relevance. He strummed the opening chords and immediately felt some of his nervousness fade away. This was familiar territory, a song he'd played hundreds of times, a song that felt like home. When he opened his mouth to sing, his voice carried across the room with a warmth and authenticity that cut through all the slick production and manufactured emotion that had preceded it. "All my exes live in Texas, and Texas is a place I'd dearly love to be." As Jake sang, something magical happened. The restless energy that had been building in the room all morning seemed to settle, replaced by something deeper and more attentive. The judges stopped taking notes and just listened. Other auditioners who had been chatting nervously fell silent. Jake found himself thinking about everything the song represented: home, heartbreak, the complicated relationships we have with the places that shape us. He thought about Cedar Creek, about the garage where he'd first heard George Strait's voice, about the dreams that had brought him to this stage. When he reached the chorus, his voice soared with genuine emotion. "But I reckon that they'd settle down, they'd follow me back home. Oh, all my exes live in Texas, like I'm George Strait, or they all just moved to Tennessee." In that moment, Jake wasn't performing for the judges or trying to impress anyone. He was simply sharing something he loved, something that mattered to him, with anyone willing to listen. The guitar felt like an extension of his body, the words like prayers he'd been carrying in his heart for years. As the final notes faded away, the room fell into complete silence. Jake looked up at the judges' table, trying to read their expressions, but their faces revealed nothing. The silence stretched on until Jake began to wonder if he should simply pack up and leave. Then, slowly, one of the judges began to applaud, then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in the kind of spontaneous applause that can't be manufactured or forced. Jake felt his face flush with a mixture of relief and pride. Whatever happened next, he had sung from his heart and touched something real in the people listening. "Thank you, Mr. Matthews," the head judge said, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been present for previous auditions. "That was refreshing. We'll be in touch." As Jake gathered his guitar and headed toward the exit, he passed Tyler Brennan, whose confident smirk had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like worry. "Nice job, Fossil," Tyler muttered, but there was no real venom in it. Outside, Emma practically tackled Jake with her enthusiasm. "That was incredible. Did you hear that applause? Did you see the judges' faces?" Melissa was beaming too. "Jake, that was exactly what this festival needed. You reminded everyone in that room why they fell in love with country music in the first place." But even as Jake basked in their praise and the afterglow of what felt like a successful audition, a small voice in the back of his mind wondered if it would be enough. The music industry was changing, and maybe Tyler was right. Maybe there wasn't room for traditional country music in the modern marketplace. Little did Jake know that his performance had been witnessed by more than just the official judges and fellow auditioners. Unbeknownst to everyone in the room, including the festival organizers, a country music legend had been standing quietly in the wings, listening to every note and watching every gesture with the discerning eye of someone who had spent decades perfecting his craft. George Strait had arrived in Austin unexpectedly, his presence known only to a small circle of festival VIPs. He had been scheduled to make a surprise appearance at the main festival, but curiosity about the next generation of country performers had drawn him to the audition space. As Jake's voice filled the room with authentic emotion and traditional country storytelling, George found himself remembering his own early days, his own struggles to maintain authenticity in an industry constantly chasing the next trend. Here was a young man who understood something that seemed increasingly rare, that the best country music comes from the heart, not from market research and focus groups. George made a mental note of Jake Matthews' name and decided to stay for the rest of the auditions. Something told him that this young singer from Cedar Creek was going to need all the support he could get in the days ahead. The afternoon stretched on with more auditions, more hope, and more heartbreak as dreams were made and crushed in 3-minute increments. But for Jake Matthews, something had shifted. He had sung his truth on that stage, and regardless of the outcome, he felt like he had honored the music that had shaped his soul. As the sun began to set over Austin, the final auditions concluded, and the exhausted hopefuls were told that results would be announced the following evening at a special showcase event. Those selected for the Lone Star Music Festival would perform one more time before the final lineup was determined. "One more night," Emma said, as they walked back to the truck. "One more chance to prove yourself." Jake nodded, his guitar case feeling lighter somehow, despite the weight of everything that still lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring either vindication or disappointment. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, he felt at peace with whatever came next. He had no way of knowing that his biggest test and his greatest opportunity still lay ahead, waiting in the wings of the Lone Star Music Festival's main stage. The Riverside Amphitheater buzzed with anticipation as the sun dipped below the Austin skyline, painting the evening sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The venue, nestled along the banks of Lady Bird Lake, had been transformed into a showcase stage for the final round of Lone Star Music Festival auditions. 24 performers had been selected from hundreds of hopefuls, and tonight, only 12 would advance to perform at the main festival. Jake stood behind the massive stage structure, his hands trembling slightly as he tuned his guitar for the third time in 10 minutes. The sound of the growing crowd filtered through the canvas walls of the performers' area. Families, music industry professionals, and curious festival goers all gathering to witness what festival organizers had billed as the future of Texas country music. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the evening's host, a popular Austin radio personality named Rick Sterling, "welcome to the Lone Star Music Festival Showcase. Tonight, we'll hear from 24 of Texas's most promising country artists, and you'll help us choose the final 12 who will perform at this weekend's main event." The crowd erupted in cheers that seemed to shake the very ground beneath Jake's feet. Emma squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. She had somehow managed to secure a spot in the performers' area, claiming to be Jake's manager to the surprisingly lax security team. "Remember what we talked about," she said, her voice barely audible over the crowd noise. "Don't think about the competition. Don't think about the judges. Just think about the music and why you love it." Melissa Carter appeared at Jake's other side, her own guitar case slung across her back. She had made the cut as well, one of only 6 female performers selected for the showcase. "Whatever happens tonight," she said, "we've already accomplished something amazing. We're here, Jake. We made it this far by being ourselves." Jake nodded, trying to calm his racing heart. The performance order had been determined by a random draw that morning, and fate had placed him 19th out of 24, late enough in the evening that some of the crowd might be getting restless, but early enough that he wouldn't be the final act trying to follow someone spectacular. The first few performances set a predictable tone. Polished contemporary country pop numbers that sounded like they could be playing on mainstream radio within the hour. The crowd responded positively, but not enthusiastically, polite applause greeting each song's conclusion. Tyler Brennan took the stage as the 7th performer, his confidence seemingly unshaken by the pressure of the moment. His song choice surprised Jake. Instead of the slick contemporary number he had performed at the audition, Tyler had chosen a more traditional-sounding piece, though his delivery remained firmly rooted in modern country styling. "Looks like someone's been taking notes," Emma muttered, clearly unimpressed by what she saw as Tyler's attempt to hedge his bets. The crowd's response to Tyler was notably warmer than it had been for previous acts. Jake had to admit grudgingly that Tyler knew how to work an audience, engaging them with eye contact and the kind of stage presence that came naturally to some performers and eluded others entirely. As Tyler exited the stage to solid applause, he caught sight of Jake in the wings and offered a mock salute. "Good luck following that, fossil," he said with his trademark smirk, though Jake noticed a thin sheen of sweat on Tyler's forehead that suggested his confidence might not be as solid as his public persona indicated. The performances continued, each act bringing something slightly different to the stage. Melissa's turn came as the 14th performer, and Jake watched with genuine admiration as she delivered a stunning version of a Patsy Cline classic, her voice carrying the kind of emotional weight that reminded everyone why country music had endured for generations. "Melissa Carter, everybody," Rick Sterling announced as she took her bow. "Now that's what I call traditional country music done right." The crowd's enthusiastic response gave Jake hope. Maybe there was still room for authenticity in this business after all. 3 more acts took the stage, each competent but forgettable. Jake barely heard them, his mind focused on the song he had chosen for tonight, Amarillo Morning, the George Strait classic that had first ignited his love for country music all those years ago in his father's garage. "Jake Matthews, you're up," called the stage manager, a burly man with a clipboard who had been herding nervous performers all evening with the efficiency of someone who had seen it all before. Emma hugged him quickly. "This is it, Jake. Everything you've worked for, everything you've dreamed about. Now go show them what real country music sounds like." The walk from the wings to center stage felt like traversing a vast desert. The stage lights were blindingly bright after the dimness backstage, and Jake had to blink several times before his eyes adjusted enough to make out the sea of faces stretching back into the darkness beyond the amphitheater's lighting. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rick Sterling's voice boomed over the sound system, "performing Amarillo Morning. Please welcome Jake Matthews from Cedar Creek, Texas." A smattering of applause greeted Jake as he adjusted the microphone stand and settled his guitar strap. In the front rows he could see the festival judges, the same faces from yesterday's auditions, plus several others he didn't recognize. Their expressions were neutral, professional, revealing nothing about their expectations or hopes for his performance. Jake strummed the opening chords and immediately felt the familiar sense of calm that always came when he connected with his music. The amphitheater's acoustics were superb, his guitar's sound carrying clearly to every corner of the venue without feeling harsh or over-amplified. "Amarillo Morning, up from the hotel floor!" As Jake sang, something remarkable began to happen. The restless energy that had characterized much of the evening seemed to settle, replaced by something deeper and more attentive. Conversations in the back rows faded to silence. Even the vendors working the crowd seemed to pause in their activities. Jake found himself thinking about that first day in the garage, about his father's radio crackling with static as George Strait's voice filled the air. He thought about all the roads he had traveled since then, metaphorically speaking, all the dreams and disappointments that had led him to this stage. On the highway, she's looking so much younger than her age. The song was a perfect showcase for Jake's strengths: storytelling, emotional authenticity, and that indefinable quality that separated genuine country music from its manufactured counterparts. His voice soared over the crowd, carrying every ounce of longing and hope that the lyrics demanded. In the VIP area stage left, unnoticed by the crowd and unknown to the performers, George Strait stood quietly with his small entourage. He had arrived just minutes before Jake's performance, his presence carefully concealed by festival security to avoid disrupting the evening's proceedings. George had been in the music business long enough to recognize authenticity when he heard it, and what he was hearing from this young man reminded him powerfully of his own early days: the hunger, the respect for traditional country music, and most importantly, the understanding that great songs were about connecting with people's hearts, not just their wallets. "That boy's got something special," George murmured to his longtime manager, Jerry Taylor. "Reminds me of why I fell in love with this music in the first place." Jerry nodded, though his attention was more focused on the crowd's reaction than on the performance itself. Audience seems to be responding well, different from the other acts tonight. Back on stage, Jake was building toward the song's emotional climax, his voice growing stronger and more confident with each passing verse. He could feel the connection with the audience now, that magical moment when performer and crowd become unified in the music's emotional current. "Amarillo Morning, she'll let him walk away." As the final notes rang out across the amphitheater, Jake was greeted by something he hadn't experienced in all his years of performing: complete silence. For a heart-stopping moment, he wondered if he had somehow failed spectacularly, if the audience was too shocked by his traditional approach to respond at all. Then the applause began, starting slowly but building with the kind of organic intensity that can't be manufactured or forced. People weren't just clapping politely. They were on their feet, cheering and whistling with genuine enthusiasm. In the front row, Jake could see one of the judges wiping at her eyes. The response went on for nearly a full minute, far longer than any previous act had received. Jake stood at the microphone, overwhelmed by the emotional weight of the moment, barely able to process what was happening. "Jake Matthews, everybody!" Rick Sterling shouted over the continuing applause. "Now that's what I call country music." As Jake made his way off the stage, his legs feeling strangely unsteady, he was intercepted by Emma, who looked like she was about to burst with pride and excitement. "Jake! That was incredible! Did you hear that crowd? Did you see the judges' faces?" But before Jake could respond, Tyler Brennan appeared at his side, his earlier smugness replaced by something that looked uncomfortably close to respect. That was really something, Jake," Tyler said quietly. "I mean it. That was the kind of performance that reminds you why you wanted to make music in the first place." Jake stared at Tyler in surprise. This wasn't the mocking competitor he had expected to encounter after his performance. This was someone who, despite their differences, understood the power of what had just happened on that stage. "Thanks, Tyler. That means a lot coming from you." Tyler nodded, then extended his hand. "Whatever happens with the judging, you've got nothing to be ashamed of. You did something real up there." As they shook hands, Jake felt some of the competitive tension between them dissolve. Maybe they would never be best friends, but perhaps they could be something better than enemies. The remaining performances felt anticlimactic after the emotional high of Jake's set. Competent singers delivered competent songs to an audience that seemed to have already made up its mind about what they had witnessed. When the final act concluded, Rick Sterling took the stage once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, what an incredible evening of music we've shared. The judges will now deliberate, and we'll announce the 12 performers selected for this weekend's Lone Star Music Festival main stage. Results will be posted in 30 minutes. The wait felt eternal. Jake, Emma, and Melissa found a quiet spot near the river, away from the anxious clusters of performers and their supporters who had gathered around the amphitheater's entrance. The water lapped gently against the shore, and the lights of downtown Austin reflected like stars on the surface. "Whatever happens," Jake said finally, "I want you both to know how grateful I am. Emma, you believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Melissa, you reminded me that I wasn't alone in loving traditional country music. Win or lose, this has been an incredible experience." Emma took his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "Jake, you're going to make it. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "And even if you don't," Melissa added with a gentle smile, "you've already won something more important. You stayed true to yourself and your music. That's what really matters." A commotion near the amphitheater entrance interrupted their quiet moment. Performers and audience members were pressing forward, trying to get a look at the posted results. Jake felt his stomach clench with nervous anticipation. "Come on," Emma said, standing and pulling him to his feet. "Let's go find out what the future holds." As they walked back toward the crowd, Jake had no way of knowing that his performance had done more than just impress the judges and move the audience. Backstage, George Strait had made a decision that would change everything, not just for Jake, but for everyone who would witness what was about to unfold. The king of country music was about to make an appearance that no one had planned for, and Jake Matthews, the small-town dreamer from Cedar Creek, was about to learn that sometimes the most important moments in life come when you least expect them. The crowd pressed forward as Rick Sterling approached the bulletin board with the official results. Jake found himself caught in the surge of anxious performers, his heart hammering against his ribs as sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. Emma clutched his left hand while Melissa held his right, the three of them forming a small island of nervous energy in the sea of hopeful faces. "The following 12 performers," Rick announced in his booming radio voice, "have been selected to perform at this weekend's Lone Star Music Festival main stage." He began reading the names in alphabetical order, each announcement triggering either celebration or heartbreak among the gathered musicians. Jake's last name meant he would have to wait through nearly the entire list, each passing second feeling like an eternity. "Tyler Brennan!" Rick called out, and Jake felt a surprising flash of genuine happiness for his former rival. Tyler had earned his spot with a solid performance, whatever their personal differences might be. Melissa Carter. Melissa squeezed Jake's hand so tightly he thought she might break his fingers. Tears streamed down her face as the reality of making the festival hit her. Jake pulled her into a quick hug, genuinely thrilled for his new friend's success. The list continued. Danny Harrison, Jennifer Liu, Bobby Rodriguez. With each name that wasn't his, Jake felt his stomach sink a little further. Maybe his performance hadn't been as well received as it seemed. Maybe the crowd's enthusiasm had been polite appreciation rather than genuine connection. Maybe... Jake Matthews! The sound of his own name hit Jake like a lightning bolt. For a moment, he wondered if he had imagined it, if his desperate hope had somehow created an auditory hallucination. But Emma's shriek of joy and the congratulatory slaps on his back from other performers confirmed that it was real. He had made it. He was going to perform at the Lone Star Music Festival. As the remaining names were read and the crowd began to disperse into celebrations and commiserations, Jake found himself in a daze. Everything he had worked for, everything he had dreamed about during those long nights practicing in the garage, had led to this moment. "We need to celebrate," Emma announced, her face glowing with pride and excitement. "This calls for barbecue and beer." "Actually," interrupted a voice Jake didn't recognize, "Mr. Matthews, there's someone who'd like to meet you first." They turned to see a well-dressed man in his 50s, wearing the kind of expensive Western wear that suggested music industry connections. His manner was polite but urgent, and something in his expression indicated this wasn't a casual fan wanting an autograph. "I'm Jerry Taylor," the man continued, extending his hand. "I work with... Well, let's just say there's someone backstage who was very impressed with your performance tonight." Emma's eyes widened. "Someone from a record label?" Jerry smiled mysteriously. "Something like that. Jake, would you be willing to come backstage for a few minutes? Your friends are welcome to wait in the VIP area if they'd like." Jake looked at Emma and Melissa, both of whom were practically vibrating with excitement. This was the kind of moment that happened in movies and dreams, not to small-town mechanics from Cedar Creek, Texas. "Go," Emma urged. "This could be it, Jake. This could be everything you've been working toward." Still feeling like he was moving through a dream, Jake followed Jerry toward the backstage area. The crowds and noise of the evening began to fade as they walked deeper into the maze of equipment trucks and temporary structures that made the festival possible. "Can you tell me who wants to meet me?" Jake asked as they navigated around a massive speaker system. Jerry glanced back with that same mysterious smile. "Let's just say it's someone who appreciates authentic country music when he hears it." They arrived at a large white trailer that served as the festival's VIP hospitality area. Jerry knocked twice, then opened the door and gestured for Jake to enter. Inside, the trailer was elegantly appointed with leather furniture and memorabilia from country music's greatest stars. But Jake barely noticed the decor because sitting in a chair at the far end of the trailer was a man he had idolized his entire life. George Strait looked up as Jake entered, and that famous smile, the one Jake had seen on album covers and concert posters since childhood, spread across his weathered face. "You must be Jake Matthews," George said, standing and extending his hand. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." Jake stood frozen, his mouth hanging slightly open, completely unable to process what was happening. This had to be some kind of elaborate dream or hallucination. George Strait, the king of country music himself, could not possibly be standing in front of him, wanting to shake his hand. You... "Mr. Strait," Jake stammered, his usual articulateness deserting him completely. George chuckled, a warm sound that immediately put Jake somewhat at ease. "Please, call me George. And before you ask, yes, I heard your performance tonight. Amarillo Morning is one of my favorites, and I have to say you did it justice." "You heard me sing?" Jake's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "I was standing stage left watching the showcase." Jerry here tells me you've been getting some grief about your song choices. People saying traditional country music is outdated, that audiences don't want to hear the old songs anymore. Jake nodded, finally finding his voice. Some folks think I'm living in the past. They say country music has evolved, and I need to evolve with it. George's expression grew more serious. Son, can I tell you something? I've been in this business for over 40 years, and I've seen trends come and go like Texas weather. But you know what never goes out of style? Truth, authenticity, songs that come from the heart and speak to people's souls. He gestured for Jake to sit down on the leather sofa across from him. When I heard you sing tonight, it reminded me why I fell in love with country music in the first place. You weren't trying to be something you're not. You weren't chasing whatever's popular on the radio this week. You were just sharing something beautiful and real. Jake felt tears welling up in his eyes. Mr. Strait, George, I can't believe you're saying this. Your music, it changed my life. It showed me what country music could be when it comes from an honest place. And that's exactly what you showed that audience tonight, George replied. But I have a feeling you're going to face more challenges ahead. The music industry can be tough on artists who don't fit the current mold. As if summoned by George's words, Jerry Taylor's phone buzzed with an urgent call. He answered it quickly, his expression growing troubled as he listened. George, we might have a problem, Jerry said after hanging up. I just got word that some of the festival organizers are having second thoughts about Jake's spot in the lineup. Apparently, some industry representatives are concerned that his traditional sound might not appeal to younger demographics. Jake felt his stomach drop. Just when his dreams seemed to be coming true, they were already threatening to slip away. George's jaw tightened. Is that so? Well, Jerry, I think it's time we reminded people what this festival is supposed to be about. He turned back to Jake. Son, what time are you supposed to perform tomorrow? They haven't posted the final schedule yet, but I think I'm in the afternoon session. George nodded thoughtfully. Here's what we're going to do. I was already planning to make a surprise appearance at the festival tomorrow night. It was supposed to be a secret until the announcement, but I think those plans just changed. Jerry looked confused. Changed how? George smiled, and Jake caught a glimpse of the mischievous spirit that had helped make him a legend. I think I'm going to watch Jake's performance from the wings. And if anyone has any problems with authentic country music, well, they can take it up with me personally. Jake stared at George in disbelief. You'd do that for me? Son, I'd do that for country music. You represent something important, a connection to the roots and traditions that made this music special in the first place. If we lose that, we lose everything that matters. George stood and placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. But I need you to promise me something. Tomorrow, when you get on that stage, I want you to sing like your life depends on it. Don't hold anything back. Show them what real country music sounds like. I promise, Jake said, his voice stronger now, filled with the determination he hadn't felt since this journey began. Good. Now go celebrate with your friends. You've earned it. But remember, tomorrow is when the real work begins. As Jake prepared to leave the trailer, George called out one more time. Jake, that song you sang tonight? Amarillo Morning. There's a reason I wrote it, you know. It's about hope, about believing that no matter how far you travel or how lost you get, there's always a way back to the things that matter most. Jake nodded, understanding flooding through him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove himself. But tonight, he had been blessed with something rarer than success, the approval and support of his hero. Outside the trailer, Emma and Melissa were waiting anxiously in the VIP area. The moment Jake appeared, Emma rushed to his side. Well, what happened? Who was it? Jake looked at his two best friends, these remarkable women who had believed in him when he barely believed in himself, and smiled. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "But tomorrow, George Strait is going to be watching me perform. And he thinks I have what it takes to make it in this business." Emma's scream of excitement could probably be heard back in Cedar Creek. Melissa grabbed Jake in a bear hug that lifted him off his feet. As the three of them laughed and celebrated under the Austin stars, Jake felt a peace settle over him that he hadn't experienced in months. Tomorrow would bring the biggest stage of his life. The chance to prove that traditional country music still had the power to move hearts and change lives. And somewhere in the wings, the king of country music would be watching, ready to remind anyone who doubted that authenticity never goes out of style. The small-town dreamer from Cedar Creek, Texas, was about to have his moment in the spotlight. But more importantly, he was about to learn that sometimes the greatest victories come not from changing who you are, but from having the courage to be exactly who you've always been. As they walked back toward their truck for the drive back to their hotel, Jake strummed a few quiet chords on his guitar and began to sing. The melody that emerged was new, born from the events of this incredible day, but it carried all the traditional country storytelling and emotional honesty that had brought him this far. "There's a highway that leads to your dreams," he sang softly. "And sometimes it's longer than it seems. But if you stay true to who you are inside, that road will be your guide." Emma and Melissa joined in, harmonizing instinctively, their voices blending with his under the vast Texas sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. But tonight, Jake Matthews was exactly where he belonged, making music with people who loved him, carrying forward the traditions that had shaped his soul. The king of country music had given him his blessing, but more importantly, he had reminded Jake of something he had always known deep down. The best music comes from the heart, and hearts never go out of style. As their truck pulled out of the Riverside Amphitheater parking lot, heading back toward their hotel and the promise of tomorrow's main stage performance, Jake caught a glimpse of George Strait's tour bus in his side mirror. The sight filled him with a mixture of nervous anticipation and quiet confidence. He was ready for whatever came next.